Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Nick. I'm the Head of Investor Relations at Anexo. I'm conscious of the fact I'm the only person who's presenting this evening who doesn't have a C at the beginning of their title. So I'm afraid you've got the monkey rather than the organ grinders because they're abroad at the moment, but I hope I can provide a reasonable substitute. I'm going to take a leaf out of Matthew's book and ask how many people have heard of or are aware of Anexo. Less than two. Excellent. So I have a virgin audience this evening. What does Anexo do? Anexo is an integrated credit hire and legal services group. We act for the non-fault motorist, and we provide replacement vehicles at commercial credit hire rates. And the important point about that is that we act, by and large, for the impecunious customer. Now, the impecunious customer is somebody who does not have the wherewithal to provide themselves with a replacement form of transport. So without us, basically, they'd be on the bus. That enables us to charge commercial credit hire rates as opposed to the spot rate which they might get if they walked into Budget or Avis and said, I've had a crash, I need a car now. They're not in a position to do that. Well, there's two sides to our business, and we use our in-house litigators to recover the hire and repair charges from the at-fault motorists' insurers. This business has been around since 1996. We have an established direct capture business model, which I'll go into in just a sec, with operating margins in excess of 30%. And you'll see from the numbers on the right-hand side, for the full year last year, we did 56.5 million. For the first half of this year, we did 36.7. So the growth is unquestionably there. We floated in June of last year at £1. Our share price today is £1.70. So there are two sides to the business, as I said. The credit hire division called Edge, which is two sides to it. DAMS, which is the car and van provision side, and McCAMS, which provides motorcycles. Motorcycles are about 60% of our business. And that's typically not the large motorbikes, that's the 125s and below. In other words, the delivery drivers, the people who do Deliveroo and parcel delivery and so on. You'd be amazed how many of those are involved in no-fault accidents. And the legal services division, which is a company called Bond Turner, our wholly owned solicitors who are based in Liverpool and in Bolton, they're basically the ones who collect the money. So they look after the recovery of hire charges and repair from the at-fault insurer. Where necessary, we look at personal injury. I would want to stress that we're not personal injury lawyers, we're not ambulance chasers. We did £56.5 million of turnover last year. About £500,000 of that was soft tissue PI injury. So we're not in the game of chasing people purely because we're looking for whiplash. And I'm sure you're aware that that is disappearing anyway next year through the introduction of the Civil Liability Act, which will restrict the amount of money you can get for whiplash and which will abolish the possibility of getting legal costs. So I just want to explain the way the insurance process works. And I'm sure most of you, if you've ever been involved in a non-fault accident, the first thing you do is ring your insurance company. Now, our people do not ring their insurance company. There is no legal requirement to inform your insurance company if you are involved in an accident. And by and large, the reason why people don't involve their insurance company is because there is no point in them making a claim through their insurance company. How do you keep your cost of insurance down? You are an impecunious motorist. So let's say you're on a 0 hours contract, you're delivering parcels or you're delivering people's pizzas for a living. All you really want is to be road legal. You need to keep your insurance down as low as possible. There are three possible ways of doing that. Number one, if you're given the box to tick, would you like a replacement vehicle? You don't tick it. If you're given a box to tick which says, would you like to protect your no claims bonus? You don't tick that. And then you're given the box for what is your insurance excess. The larger the excess is that you're due to pay, the lower your premium is. So in order to get the lowest possible monthly premium to enable you to get out on the road and start earning a living, you will have the highest excess you can possibly get. So there is no point at all in going to your insurance company and saying, I've had a crash that's going to cost £1,000 to repair, when the insurance company says, well, you're going to have to pay all of that because that comes under your excess. So the way we do it, under normal circumstances, I'm assuming that everybody in this room is not impecunious. If you are impecunious, then I'm interested to know why you're here. But by and large, people are not. So, and under normal circumstances, you would get in touch with your insurance company. They may very well give you a replacement vehicle. It may not be the replacement vehicle you want, and you may very well not have it for as long as you want, but you will probably get a replacement vehicle. They will then get the car fixed from you at one of their approved garages. And when it comes for you to renew your insurance, you'll discover that your premium has gone sky high, regardless of the fact that you have a no-claims bonus or not. On our side, the motorist takes his vehicle to his favourite garage. It's what my chairman calls Fred in a shed. and I'm sure we've all got one. There's one guy and his son who are operating under the arches or in a converted barn. I've certainly got one. And he does people's cars as cheaply and as reliably as he can. He does his MOTs and so on and so forth. It's a one or two man business. He takes them to the garage. We get our business from referral garages. They don't work for us, but they send us customers. We have about 1,150 referral garages across the UK. So when that happens, they contact us. The customer is recommended by the garage to contact us. We then provide them a replacement vehicle roughly within 24 hours. We get the repair done, or else we have the car assessed by an independent court-appointed engineer who decides whether or not it is a write-off. And then our guy is provided with his vehicle until either his repair is complete and he gets his repaired vehicle back, or else the insurance company issues him a cheque, which is the cost of the write-off. And that gives you another idea of the way it works. And as I say, direct capture is the way we work forward. So I think that's a broad. I think I've covered more or less everything there. Just to say, the way it works is very, very few cases end in actual litigation. Less than 1.5% of our cases actually get to court, and of those, very, very few of them occasionally we lose. I think we lost 22 cases last year. So it happens very, very rarely. The way this works is ultimately, it's difficult to explain entirely how insurance companies approach this, but an insurance company has a policy of trying to hang on to their cash for as long as they possibly can. I'll just move back to that one. They want to hang on to their cash as long as they possibly can. I don't have a statistic, but I'm willing to bet you that somewhere within an insurance company, there is a piece of paper that says, if we ignore people, then a large proportion of them go away. And I think that's borne out by a lot of people's experience. So what we find is that this accident happens. The whole claim goes through our vetting process. We weed out the claims we don't want. We weed out the claims where we think there may not be a pure at-fault situation where there's possibly shared liability. We weed out claims where there's possibly an element of fraud. We just put the vehicles on the road we want. We then notify the insurance company that we have a claim against them. There is a hire vehicle on the road, and that hire vehicle is clocking up cost on a daily basis. What happens? They ignore us. We then send them another letter. And basically, there's a 90-day period where there's an electronic portal where both sides put all the information they need into that portal. So everybody has access to it. This is where Bond Turner gets involved. And at the end of that 90-day period, we send them a letter saying, you owe us some money. And they ignore us. At that point, we institute court proceedings. So we always litigate to get our money back. That's really important. People sometimes compare us with people like Help Hire, who, as you probably aware, had a very unhappy time some years ago. The difference between us and Help Hire is Help Hire were not able to litigate. They just sent people reminders saying they owed them money, and eventually they ran out of cash and went bust. We always litigate. So we apply for a court date as soon as it appears apparent that the insurance company is not going to pay us. We then send them a reminder every 7 days by email and by registered post saying, you owe us this money, there's still a hire vehicle on the road, and it's racking up charges. It's up to you to pay it. And we go all the way to the court date, and more often than not, on the steps of the court, the insurance company will say, okay, we'll settle. Now, there's something you should be aware of here, that insurance companies employ or engage their own firms of solicitors. These are the people that we act against. We are the claimant solicitors, they're the defendant solicitors. It is in the interest of the defendant solicitors, they basically get paid more the longer the case goes on. This goes against what you would imagine would be common sense. If I were an insurance company, I would say to my solicitors, I will pay you more the quicker you settle the case. As it stands at the moment, if the solicitor drags it on and drags it on and drags it on, their fee at the end of the process is higher than it would be otherwise. So there is no incentive for them to settle the case early. Okay? So this can go on for a very considerable amount of time, and I'll come back to this in a wee while. Just to give you an idea, we floated in June of last year, as I mentioned. We raised a certain amount of cash, and a lot of that cash was spent on expanding the vehicle fleet. Okay? So the number of vehicles on the road went up to roughly 1,500, as opposed to 900 at the end of the first half of 2018. Now, that's great. Now, the issue with that is it's absorbing quite a lot of cash, because we've got cash tied up in leasing our vehicles or owning them outright, as we do the motorcycles, and we've got cash tied up with paying the repair garages for the repairs they're doing for the vehicles. What we don't want to do is we don't want to tie up all our working capital while we're waiting to get it back from the insurance companies. So the next stage of the process was to retain the number of vehicles on the road at a flat level and to expand the number of litigators we had who are claiming the money back from the insurance companies where these claims are being generated. Okay, so in terms of what Edge is now doing, you'll see at the bottom, we've got about just under 1,000 cars, we've got about 2,000 motorbikes. And the utilization rate, I'll try that again. The utilization rate of those is about 70%. If we get more than 70%, my fleet managers tend to get a bit twitchy about it. But it basically means we have 4 depots across the country. So if you need a vehicle, by and large, we can get one to you within 24 hours. So what we did with Bond Turner, which is our litigation department, which is based in Liverpool, we took the decision to open another office, and we opened a Bolton office in December last year. The rationale for that was simply that, I don't know how many of you know Liverpool, but it's quite difficult to get to in some ways. We were hiring a lot of people in Manchester who were then commuting over to Liverpool, spending 2 hours getting there, spending 2 hours getting back, and then giving up and moving on to somewhere else. So we opened an office in Bolton, and we've had great success in recruiting people there. So it's very straightforward in terms of cash collection. The equation is such: if we have more litigators, we are able to take on more cases, and we are able to settle more cases, and therefore that increases our rate of cash collection. We've got some cash collection stats, which will come up in a wee bit, but in fact, actually, there we are. Cash collections in July was a new monthly record for the group, and just to give you an idea, in 2018, we were looking at cash collections of somewhere between 3 and 4 million a month. In July of this year, it was 7.7. So there's a massive increase in the amount of cash we're bringing in, which is purely a function of being able to increase the number of cases that we are dealing with. The number of senior litigators coming in has gone up to just over 100, and we have people joining all the time. That number is now out of date. This presentation, incidentally, was based on the interims presentation we did in September. And the purpose of the exercise with that is that it takes roughly 9 months for a litigator to bed in. In other words, when they join, we'll give them a certain number of cases which are moving towards completion, we'll give them a certain number of cases which are bang in the middle, and we'll give them quite a lot of new cases which they can begin to get their teeth into. So as we go into the first half of 2020, we're going to see more cash collections coming in as those litigators hit their stride in terms of the number of files which they're able to handle. One thing I wanted to mention also is that we do have an advocacy department, and we always have done. We take on various different types of cases, including professional negligence, clinical negligence, and so on. And there have been a few headlines coming out recently. We've recently been involved in a class action involving Aston Hall Psychiatric Hospital. I don't know whether you're aware of this. It was in the papers. It was a major sex abuse case. We acted for a number of the claimants there. We actually got the case through an individual to whom we supplied a car, and they came back to us and said, "Is there any way you could help me with this claim?" We took them on. We ended up with quite a number of defendants, and we won. At the moment, there's arguments about cost, and that cost will come in due course. This is not the bread and butter of our business, but as and when these advocacy cases come to fruition, it's a nice fillip to the bottom line. So financial numbers, looking at the first half, revenue 36.7 as against 23.6, operating profit 11.8. You can see that we are beginning to really show the benefits of increasing the number of litigators we've got, and it comes straight through to the bottom line in terms of cases that we sold. Now, backlog of cases, we have about 20,000 cases as a backlog. We solve roughly we complete roughly, or settle roughly 6,000 a year. So we have, even if we stopped taking on more cases now, we have a 3-year runoff in terms of clearing the cases that we've got. I'm also wanted to stress that we're very careful with the cases that we take on. Our network of 1,150 referrer garages gave us about 12,000 opportunities last year. Of that, we put about 6,000 vehicles on the road. In other words, 6,000 of them, we said it's not for us, either because we weren't confident that we had total liability on behalf of the other side's insurance company, or we felt that the repair cost was sufficient that it would use up too much of our working capital. It all depends on how you define an impecunious client. It's quite interesting that we have a number of people who you wouldn't expect to be impecunious, but turn out to be. The example we always use is we had a British Airways pilot who was earning £150,000 a year. On the face of it, he was not impecunious. And it turned out this is absolutely true, it turned out he had 3 ex-wives and 6 children at university, and therefore he didn't actually have any money. So there was no prospect of him being able to replace his own vehicle. Take the other side, and this is a slightly more generic example, is Kevin, the plumber's apprentice, who's maybe making 12 grand a year as an apprentice, and he's living with his parents. Now, you would expect him to have no money at all, but he's got no rental cost, he's got no food costs, and he's got £2,000 in the bank. So when we look at his bank statements, as we do with all our customers, we feel that, okay, you're not impecunious, therefore, if this case were eventually to go to court, we don't think we'd be able to win it on your behalf, because the judge would sit there and say, well, actually, you were perfectly capable of going out and buying yourself a £500 car. This is the purpose of the vetting, okay? So the KPIs, we're very careful with our KPIs. I mean, I'm sure anybody else who's presenting here, the point about a KPI is once it's out of the box, you can't stick it back in again. So we're anxious to make sure that all these KPIs are publicly available and continue to be so during the life of the company. And I think one of the important things to look at here is the average hire period in days, which went up in the first half from 76 to 65. Now, the reason why that happens, by and large, a repair is probably going to take between 4 and 6 weeks, and then you're going to have a vehicle back on the road. So let's call that 42 days for the sake of argument. The reason why our hire days are larger than that is because we are concentrating more and more on vehicles that are written off as opposed to vehicles that are repairable. Now, there's two reasons for that. Number one, it's less use of my working capital. If I've got a car tied up getting a repair, it may be an expensive repair, I have to pay the garage before I get my money back. If it's a write-off, we pay the garage very little. The garage gets the pickup cost for going to put the car on a low loader and taking it back to the yard, and they can charge us 28 days where it sits in the yard and gathers dust and pigeons sit on it. And that's it. So it's a very straightforward use of our capital. With write-offs, especially with motorbikes, with small motorbikes, if you've got a £500 motorbike, it gets knocked down the road by somebody, it's going to be a write-off. It's as simple as that. And don't forget, we don't decide whether it's a write-off or not. There is an independent court-appointed engineer, which both sides recognise has the authority. He will come along and say, if that's a write-off, that's fine. We then write to the insurance company and say, this vehicle is a write-off, that's agreed. For the sake of argument, you owe us £1,000. If you send us a £1,000 cheque, then we'll give it to the customer. He's got 7 days to replace his vehicle, and we'll take our hire vehicle back. If you don't send us a cheque, which they don't, then you should be aware that this hire vehicle will be on the road until such time as you send us a cheque. And this can be a very, very considerable period of time. So that's where the 76-day comes from. It is entirely within, I really want to stress this, it's entirely within the remit of the insurance company to settle this business. I've had a number of people come up to me and say, well, you're just exploiting insurance companies and you're charging ridiculous rates and so on and so forth. It is not really the point. The insurance company is liable to either pay for the repair or pay for the replacement of the vehicle which the victim has lost. The fact that they take so long to decide that they're going to pay up is a problem that they have to solve. It's not a problem that we can help them with. And this is underpinned by the fact that we have 3 Supreme Court decisions underlining the fact that we provide a useful service for people by providing vehicles for people who would otherwise not have the ability to get them. And therefore, we don't believe that there is a threat either by statute or by common law to our business model at any stage in the near future. So the outlook. There are 2 ways of looking at this, but the main thing is it's really all about cash. We had a capital markets day in the city on Tuesday, which I organised. We had about 50 institutions and brokers turn up to hear our story. And ultimately, the story we hear again and again and again is you absorb a lot of cash. You've got to prove to us that you can generate it at the end of the day. Now, that is proven as far as we're concerned, because as I say, when the repair period comes to an end and we invoice the insurance company, we know, because we have an admission of liability, that we are going to be able to collect that cash at the very latest at the date we go to court. But I understand that that's not sufficient for some people. So the decision we took this year, and we're going to maintain that next year, is to keep the fleet flat and to continue to grow our legal services side so that we settle more cases, which continues to generate more cash. Our goal is to reach a position where we are net cash generative on a monthly basis. Now, I'm not in the position, and I certainly don't have the mandate to give any promises, but I believe that we're very close to being net cash generative by the end of this calendar year. Now, that may not continue on a monthly basis because these things are cyclical. You can imagine fewer cases settle around Christmas and fewer cases settle in August, and we never know how many people are going to have accidents at any given time. So the number of vehicles we have on the road also fluctuates. But when we come back and see the city in April, after we've had with our full year numbers, we want to be able to say to them, as we have said so far since float, we have done what we have said we're going to do, and on this occasion what we have said we are going to do is keep the fleet steady, increase the number of lawyers we've got, and therefore prove that our business model generates hard cash at the end of the day. We're very, very confident that we have these 2 levers and we're able to push them as delicately as we want. If we need more lawyers, we can just do that. If we need more cars, we can do that. Otherwise, we can just keep it level to make sure that the cash keeps coming in. In terms of litigators, we've taken another floor in Bolton, so we're going to be expanding there. It's very likely that we will open a 3rd office, probably in Leeds. all our offices tend to be based somewhere where there are large numbers of defendant solicitors, because we're in the fortunate position of being able to pay quite well compared with the defendant solicitor, so we just pinch all their staff. And the useful thing about that is that we get people with whom we've been at loggerheads sometimes for many years on the other side of the fence. They're coming to work for us. Not only do we get the benefit of their experience and ability, we're also depriving the competition of their most valuable people. I mean, ultimately, we pay bonuses, we pay overtime. We are able to allow employees to enjoy a considerably higher standard of income than they get if they're working for a defendant firm. So we've never had to use a recruitment agency. All our people have come to us free of. And I think that more or less does it. We've got some appendices here, which are the income statement, the balance sheet, the cash flow, and I think that more or less makes it exactly on time.
Yeah, impressive.
So if anybody has any questions, I'd be very happy to answer
questions.
If you increase the number of litigators, does that mean you settle the cases quicker?
Not necessarily. No, we're just able to deal with more cases. The settlement of the case, we would love to settle cases more quickly, and the settlement of the cases is effectively within the remit of the insurance company. Now, one stat, sorry, I should have mentioned this statistic, and this is such an important one, I should have really mentioned it. We settle, let's say we have a £10,000 claim. We settle on average at about 56.5% of that. So for every £10,000 claim, when the insurance company finally gets around to talking to us, we will usually agree on somewhere around about 5,600 of that, okay? So the insurance we are prepared to negotiate with the insurance companies. It's entirely up to them as to the time period when they do that. So with more litigators, we would love to settle cases more quickly because then that releases more capital for us to put into new vehicles on the road and to put into new cases.
But if you've kept the fleet the same,
yeah,
you haven't got the capacity to deal with more cases, have you?
Well, we've got the capacity to be able to do more cases because we've got a 20,000 case backlog. And these are cases where, I mean, out of those 20,000 cases, 12,000 already have admission of liability. So those are sitting there. And sometimes, I mean, I don't know what your experience of insurance companies are, but sometimes these things can drag on for years. Yeah. And so actually more litigators means that we can start dealing with that backlog as well as being highly selective with the cases we take on. 6,000 is more or less the magic number. Last year we put 6,000 new vehicles on the road, and we've got 20-odd thousand. So if we're solving 6,000, 7,000 a year, which we should be, then there's still that rolling backlog. So we don't have a problem in terms of our litigation numbers.
Okay.
I wonder if you could say something about accounting for the prospective benefits of your litigation and the costs of the litigation. At what stage do either hit the profit and loss account?
No, fair enough. So ultimately, if I've got a £10,000 claim, which we've mentioned, and the £10,000 claim is both the hire cost and also the legal costs associated with collecting it, okay? At the time the hire period comes to an end, in other words, we start process against the insurance company, we will book 47% of our claim. That's a very specific figure, and that figure's not been plucked out of the air. That's a figure that we have spent the last 20 years working out as being something that we regard as being both prudent and realistic. When we finally settle the case, then the uplift, which as we stand at the moment is the difference between 47% and our 56.5% average, that's when we book it to the bottom line. So with a £10,000 claim, when I issue proceedings against the insurance company, I'll book 4,700 of that. Then when they settle, I've got another £950 that goes straight through to the bottom line. Now, as I say, some of these cases can drag on for quite a long time. Anything over 4 years gets written off. And then as and when it's settled, it'll come back in again at that stage. But that's how we account for it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so most of the £20,000 backlog is seeing 47%.
Not necessarily, because not all of that has had proceedings instituted. A lot of that still needs to be done. So, and that's partly, we have very high receivables, and that partly explains it. A lot of those receivables are credit hire cases which are held there. Yes, sir.
You've described a very capital-intensive business model. I mean, your slide shows your net debt's gone up 10 times in 1 year. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what your net margin is on the capital employed, and where do you see any competition? Are you vulnerable to a competitor with a deeper set of pockets than you
understood.
have?
Okay, I mean, our debt went up partly because, firstly, we invested quite a lot in terms of what we're doing with our vehicle fleet, and we've invested quite a lot in terms of our litigators. Just to be clear, in terms of our debt, we have a discounted invoice discounting facility with Secure Trust, which covers most of it, plus a facility with HSBC. In terms of competition, we don't really have any, to be honest. In order to compete, you're going to have very, very deep pockets, because you're going to have to build your relationships with 1,100 odd garages nationwide who are going to refer cases to you. You've also got to buy, lease, or maintain a fleet of cars. It's a capital-intensive process. In terms of our competition, we have one or two high street solicitors who are mainly after PI work. In other words, they're looking for the whiplash. And they may run a fleet of, they've got 6 battered Toyotas, which they may hire out. But they're not really interested in that side of things. They're interested in getting the PI business. And they're all shutting up shop because of the Civil Liability Act. So I can actually stand here hand on heart and say we do not have a great deal of competition. The thing to bear in mind in terms of the average hire company, Avis or Budget or whatever it may be, if you're going on holiday and you say, well, I'm going on holiday in a fortnight, and you go onto Budget and you say, I want a car in a fortnight's time, you will get a very competitive rate. They advertised as being £39 a day. It'll be £39 a day. If you go into Budget today and say, I've had an accident and I need a car in 5 minutes, strangely enough, it's not going to be £39 a day. It's going to be much higher than that, and actually it's going to be very similar to the kind of rates that we charge. So it's important to bear in mind that our commercial credit hire rates, although they are higher than the spot rate is not available to people who need a vehicle on short notice, and they're certainly not available to our customers because they have no credit. They don't have credit cards, they haven't got any money. So even if they go into Budget says, well, how are you going to pay for it? And they say, I don't know, because until I get paid at the end of the week, I have no money. It's important to bear that in mind. Does that help?
Great, thank you. I think
Sorry.
we'll leave it there. That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Nick. Cheers.